Have you ever noticed there's a difference between having a thought and being hijacked by it? Most people believe their thoughts are reality, when in fact they are just distorted echoes of fear, projecting scenarios that will never happen. But there's something even more disturbing. There are 7 specific types of thoughts that act as direct triggers for anxiety attacks, and you probably recognize all of them. How many times have you found yourself trapped in a mental spiral where a simple thought turns into an imaginary catastrophe? How many times has your mind built apocalyptic scenarios about situations that haven't even occurred? This isn't just a distraction or normal worry. It's what Jung would call an autonomous complex taking control of your psyche. Carl Jung discovered that the human mind has unconscious mechanisms that operate independently of our conscious will. When we don't integrate our mental shadow, these thought patterns become invisible tyrants, dictating our emotions and creating states of paralyzing anxiety. Anxiety isn't born from the external world. It springs from the resistance to the dark contents we reject within ourselves. Look how it works. You have a thought about something that could go wrong. Instead of simply observing it, you identify with it. By identifying with it, you feed it energy. By feeding it energy, it grows and calls upon other similar thoughts. In a matter of minutes, you're no longer thinking about a possibility. You are emotionally experiencing a tragedy that exists only in your imagination. But here's what most people don't realize. These excessive thoughts are not random. They follow specific patterns, dark archetypes that repeat in the psyches of anxious people around the world. They are like mental programs running in the background, consuming the vital energy that should be available for your present life. The brutal truth is that you are not being attacked by anxiety. You are co-creating anxiety through 7 specific types of thoughts that act as fuel for the fire of fear. Each of these thoughts is a door you unconsciously open to states of panic and despair. The good news: once you recognize these patterns, you regain the power of choice. You stop being a victim of your own thoughts and become the conscious observer who can decide which thoughts deserve attention and which should be simply observed and released. Today, you will learn about the 7 thoughts that most fuel anxiety attacks. Not just to identify them, but to understand the psychological dynamics behind each one. You will understand how they form, why they have so much power over you, and more importantly, how to transform your relationship with them. Prepare to look directly at the mental patterns you may have never consciously questioned, because once you see, you can no longer unsee. And it is precisely this awareness that marks the beginning of your freedom. But before I reveal the 7 thoughts, you need to understand something fundamental about how your anxious mind really works. Now look directly at yourself. No filters, no excuses, no armor of self-deception. How many hours a day do you spend as a prisoner of your own thoughts? How many times have you woken up in the middle of the night with your mind racing with catastrophic scenarios about the next day? You know the feeling. A seemingly innocent thought crosses your mind, something like, "What if I can't do it?" Or, "What if something goes wrong?" In seconds, this simple thought multiplies like a virus, infecting every corner of your consciousness. Your breathing quickens, your heart pounds, your hands sweat. You're not facing a real danger, you're being tortured by imaginary possibilities. Recognize the pattern. It's as if your mind were a theater where the same actors perform the same tragedies day after day. The actor of professional failure, the actress of social rejection, the protagonist of the incurable disease, the supporting character of financial disaster. They all have memorized lines, rehearsed gestures, and you are the captive audience that can't leave the theater. Have you ever tried to control these thoughts? Tried to suppress them? Deny them, distract yourself from them? How did that work out? You probably discovered that the more you fight against them, the stronger they become. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. This happens because you are trying to fight the shadow instead of integrating it. Notice your breath right now. Just by reading about these patterns, Does something stir within you? That's recognition. Your psyche knows exactly what we're talking about because it experiences these patterns daily. You might try to downplay, rationalize, or justify it. But deep down, you know. Your mind has become a self-regulating prison. How many opportunities have you lost because excessive thoughts paralyzed you? How many relationships have been sabotaged by anticipatory anxiety? How many dreams have been buried under the avalanche of negative what-ifs? How many nights of sleep have been hijacked by a mind that insists on solving problems that don't exist? The truth you need to face is this. You are not a victim of your thoughts. You are their accomplice. Every time you identify with a catastrophic thought, you are voting for it. Every time you feed the negative scenario with your emotional attention, you are funding your own anxiety. But don't blame yourself for this. This complicity is unconscious. You were never taught the difference between having a thought and being a thought. No one ever taught you that you are the observer, not the observed. That you are the sky, not the clouds that pass through it. As long as you believe you are your thoughts, you remain their slave. As long as you identify with the mental drama, you are forced to play the role the thoughts have written for you. As long as you resist what arises in your mind, you feed the very thing you are trying to avoid. Are you ready to discover the 7 thoughts that most fuel your anxiety attacks? Are you prepared to look the mental tyrants that govern your emotional life in the eye? Because once you recognize them, you will never be the same. Awareness is irreversible. First, you need to understand how these thoughts gain so much power over you. Your mind is not a computer processing objective information. It is a complex theater where multiple internal personalities compete for the stage of consciousness. Jung discovered that we have autonomous psychic fragments, complexes that operate like independent entities within the psyche. Anxiety is born when these complexes take control of the mental narrative. Imagine your mind as a theater where you should be the director, but you've handed over command to neurotic actors who only know how to perform tragedies. Every anxious thought is a dark character that has taken the stage without permission, reciting apocalyptic scripts that you never consciously wrote. The mechanism is simple and devastating. A thought arises carrying an emotion of fear. Instead of observing it as a temporary mental event, you merge with it. This fusion creates identification. Identification generates more emotional energy. More energy attracts similar thoughts. In minutes, you are no longer having a thought. You have become the thought. Why does this happen? Because your mental shadow has never been integrated. The shadow is composed of all the parts of you that have been rejected, denied, or considered unacceptable. When you reject the possibility of failure, for example, that energy doesn't disappear. It goes into the unconscious and returns as obsessive thoughts about failing. Anxiety is always a message from the shadow. It is trying to show you aspects of yourself that you refuse to accept consciously. The fear of being rejected reveals the part of you that rejects itself. The terror of not being enough points to the shadow that carries feelings of inadequacy. The panic about the future is born from the refusal to accept uncertainty as a natural part of existence. Every excessive thought is a projection. You project onto the future the fears you carry in the present. You project onto others the judgments you make about yourself. You project onto the external world the internal critic that never stops. The anxious mind is a projection machine running at full speed. But there is something even deeper. These thoughts follow archetypal patterns. They are like universal mental programs that manifest similarly in anxious people around the world. The archetype of imminent catastrophe, the complex of social judgment, the shadow of inevitable failure. They all have specific signatures, predictable triggers. When you understand that you are not your thoughts, something fundamental changes. You realize you can observe them without identifying with them. You can feel them without being dominated by them. You can recognize them as temporary visitors in the house of consciousness, not as permanent owners. Freedom doesn't come from eliminating negative thoughts. That is impossible and even harmful. Freedom comes from changing your relationship with them. From an identified observer, you become a disidentified observer. From a captive audience, you transform into a conscious director. The 7 thoughts you're about to discover are the main actors in the theater of anxiety. Each has its specialty, its method of seduction, its particular way of hijacking your peace of mind. Knowing these patterns is the first step to reclaiming power over your own mind. The first thought that fuels anxiety attacks is, what if something terrible happens? This is the catastrophe thought, the expert in turning remote possibilities into emotional realities. It takes a neutral situation and projects the worst-case scenario. Going on a plane trip? What if the plane crashes? Giving a presentation? What if I get sick in front of everyone? This thought is fueled by the shadow of control. You don't accept that life is uncertain, so your mind tries to control the uncontrollable by creating scenarios to prepare for the worst. The second is, I won't be able to handle it. This thought is the self-confidence saboteur, the expert in convincing you that you are too fragile to face life's challenges. Before anything even happens, it declares your defeat. I won't be able to handle the rejection. I can't take it if it goes wrong. I don't have the strength for this. This thought is born from the shadow of vulnerability. You reject your humanity, your natural ability to adapt, and project fragility where there is only unintegrated sensitivity. The third destructive thought is, everyone is going to notice my anxiety. This is the social judgment thought, the actor that turns your internal experience into a public spectacle. It convinces you that your anxiety is as visible as a flashing neon sign, that everyone is watching, judging, commenting. They'll see I'm nervous. They'll notice I'm shaking. They'll see I'm sweating. This thought feeds on the shadow of authenticity. You are so afraid of being rejected for who you really are that you create a social paranoia where you imagine you are always being evaluated. The fourth thought is, I need to have total control over everything. This is the anxious perfectionist thought, the tyrant that demands you be able to predict and control every aspect of reality. I need to make sure nothing goes wrong. I have to be prepared for all possibilities. I can't leave anything to chance. This thought is born from the shadow of trust. Deep down, you don't trust life. You don't trust your ability to improvise. You don't accept that chaos is a natural part of existence. So you try to create an illusion of control that drains all your vital energy. Do you recognize these patterns operating in your mind? Each one functions like an automatic mental program that triggers in specific situations. The catastrophe thought arises in the face of the unknown. The self-confidence saboteur appears before challenges. Social judgment activates in situations of exposure. Anxious perfectionism dominates when you feel you need to have everything under control. These first 4 thoughts work in synergy, creating a self-feeding web of anxiety. One triggers another. The imaginary catastrophe makes you believe you won't be able to handle it, which increases the fear of social judgment, which in turn intensifies the need for total control, which makes any unforeseen event a potential catastrophe. But there are still 3 more thoughts that are even more subtle and destructive. 3 mental patterns that operate in the deepest layers of the anxious psyche, fueling anxiety in ways you may have never consciously perceived. Prepare to meet the thoughts that complete the anxious mind's arsenal. The 5th thought that triggers anxiety is, I should be over this by now. This is the temporal self-rejection thought, the inner critic that turns your natural healing process into evidence of personal failure. Why do I still feel anxiety? I've tried so many things and nothing works. I should be better by now. Ninth, this thought is particularly cruel because it turns your healing journey into a source of additional anxiety. It feeds on the shadow of patience. You reject the natural time the psyche needs to integrate changes, creating an artificial pressure that sabotages the healing process itself. The sixth destructive thought is, something is fundamentally wrong with me. This is the pathologizing the self thought, the expert in turning natural personality traits into evidence of an irreparable defect. I'm defective. I don't function like a normal person. There's something broken in me that can't be fixed. This thought is born from the shadow of self-acceptance. Instead of recognizing anxiety as an understandable response to thought patterns and past experiences, you turn it into proof that there is something intrinsically wrong with your essence. The seventh and most devastating thought is, I'll never get rid of this. This is the eternal prison thought, the prophet of pessimism who declares anxiety a permanent and immutable condition. I'll always be like this. I'll never be normal. This is never going to get better. I'll carry this for the rest of my life. This thought is the most destructive because it removes all hope of transformation, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where the belief in the impossibility of change makes change truly impossible. This last thought feeds on the shadow of faith, not religious faith, but faith in the transformative capacity of human consciousness. When you believe you'll never get better, you are denying the psyche's evolutionary potential. You are declaring that consciousness is powerless against unconscious patterns, when in fact the exact opposite is true. These seven thoughts form a complete psychological conspiracy. They complement each other, feed each other, and create a mental reality where anxiety is not just a temporary emotional state, but a fixed and immutable identity. The catastrophe thought creates the problem. The self-confident saboteur declares your inability to cope. Social judgment adds social shame. Perfectionism generates additional pressure. Temporal self-rejection turns the healing process into evidence of failure. Pathologizing the self turns characteristics into defects, and the eternal prison removes all hope of liberation. Do you recognize how they operate in your mind? How they take turns commanding your consciousness? How they create an internal narrative where you are simultaneously the victim, the problem, and the living proof that there is no solution? The good news is that recognizing these patterns is already the beginning of freedom. You cannot transform what you do not see. You cannot change what you do not recognize. You cannot integrate what remains unconscious. By identifying these seven mental tyrants, you have already begun to take back the power they hold over you. Now, you need to learn how to relate to them in a completely new way. Now that you recognize the seven thoughts that fuel your anxiety, it's time to learn the technique that will transform your relationship with them. We're not talking about eliminating them. That's impossible and unnecessary. We're talking about conscious integration through what Jung would call working with the mental shadow. The first step is to develop the capacity for disidentified observation. When one of the seven thoughts arises, instead of automatically merging with it, practice this internal phrase. I am observing the thought that something terrible is going to happen, or I am noticing the thought that I will never get better. See the difference? You are not the thought. You are the one observing the thought. This distinction changes everything. Practice the 3 R's technique. Recognize, breathe, redirect. When you identify one of the 7 destructive mental patterns, first, consciously recognize it. This is the catastrophe thought, or this is the voice of temporal self-rejection. Naming the thought removes some of its hypnotic power. Next, take 3 conscious breaths, anchoring yourself in the present moment. Finally, redirect your attention to a more constructive question. Instead of, what if something terrible happens? Ask, how can I prepare adequately without creating unnecessary anxiety? Instead of, I won't be able to handle it, ask, what internal resources do I have to face this? Instead of, Everyone is going to notice my anxiety. Ask, how can I be authentic without worrying about judgment? Yonder, develop what I call a conscious internal dialogue. When the critical voice appears, respond to it as you would a frightened child who needs loving guidance. If the thought says, something is fundamentally wrong with me, respond, you are scared, and that's understandable. Anxiety is not a defect. It's information about patterns that need to be integrated. Practice the mental shadow exercise daily. Set aside 10 minutes to consciously dialogue with your anxious thoughts. Ask each one, what are you trying to protect me from? What legitimate fear is behind this exaggerated worry? How can I honor your protective intention without being dominated by anxiety? Remember, every anxious thought carries a distorted wisdom. The catastrophe thought wants you to be prepared for challenges. The self-confidence saboteur wants to protect you from disappointment. The social judgment thought wants to ensure your tribal acceptance. They all have protective intentions that have been perverted by fear. Integration happens when you recognize the positive intention behind the negative thought. Thank it for that intention, but choose a more mature way to meet that need. Instead of imagining catastrophes, you prepare realistically. Instead of sabotaging yourself, you encourage yourself with compassion. Instead of fearing judgment, you cultivate authenticity. The goal is not to have a mind without negative thoughts. That would be unnatural and dangerous. The goal is to develop a mature relationship with all mental contents, where you are the conscious conductor of the orchestra of thoughts, not a lost musician trying to play all the instruments at once. The transformation happens gradually. Every time you choose to observe instead of identify, you strengthen the muscle of consciousness. Every time you respond instead of react, you integrate another fragment of the mental shadow. Your mind is becoming your ally instead of your enemy. Something has changed in you throughout this journey. You can no longer pretend you don't know how your mind operates. You can no longer play the innocent victim of your own thoughts. You have seen the 7 mental tyrants that governed your emotional life. You've recognized their voices, understood their methods, and discovered their distorted intentions. You are now the conscious observer of the patterns that once controlled you unconsciously. You are no longer the captive audience in the theater of anxiety. You are the director who can choose which thoughts deserve the stage of attention. You are no longer the prisoner of negative what-ifs. You are the integrator who transforms fears into wisdom. Notice how your breathing has changed since the beginning. Notice how something has settled within your chest. Notice how a part of you has relaxed upon recognizing that you are not broken, just disintegrated. That you are not sick, just unconscious. That you are not condemned, just imprisoned by patterns you can now transform. You have understood that every anxious thought is a coded message from the shadow asking for integration. That every catastrophic what-if is a part of you wanting protection. That every inner critic is a wounded aspect asking for compassion. That every fear of judgment is a facet of you desiring acceptance. Anxiety is no longer your enemy. It has become your teacher. Excessive thoughts are no longer your torturers. They have transformed into information about unintegrated parts of your psyche. You are no longer a victim of your own mind. You are the alchemist who turns mental lead into conscious gold. You have discovered that freedom doesn't come from having perfect thoughts, but from having a mature relationship with all thoughts. That peace is not born from the absence of anxiety, but from the ability to dance with it consciously. That healing is not the elimination of fears, but the compassionate integration of all parts of yourself. Now you carry a responsibility. You can no longer use ignorance as an excuse. You can no longer say you don't know why you feel anxiety. You can no longer passively surrender to the 7 destructive mental patterns. You have the tools, you have the awareness, you have the map to exit the mental prison you built yourself. The journey of integration is just beginning. Every day will be an opportunity to choose consciousness over identification. to choose observation over absorption, to choose compassionate dialogue over destructive criticism, to choose presence over projection. Comment on which of the 7 thoughts impacted you the most. Share which pattern you recognized operating in your mind. Let other people know they are not alone on this journey of awakening to the mechanisms of anxiety. Like this content, if you felt the courage to look at your mental shadow without judgment. If you recognize that observing your anxious thoughts doesn't make them more real, but less powerful. Subscribe to continue receiving tools for integration and self-knowledge. To learn more about how to transform your relationship with anxiety through consciousness. You are no longer a slave to your thoughts. You are the free observer who can choose which internal voices deserve attention. You are the conscious presence that integrates shadows instead of being dominated by them. Mental freedom is your natural inheritance. It's time to claim it.